What if the man who saves your life is the same man the whole world calls a criminal? 6 silver coins for a cure. She only had to, and the hero standing in front of her could see, with a single glance, that the cure itself was a lie. 7 ingredients where 3 would do. 4 of them were dead weight, added on purpose. 15% of the healing power it should have had. But rewind, go back one day. Before the coins, before the woman, before any of it. Daniel Carter woke up face down in sawdust, in a workshop that had been abandoned for years. Sawdust filled his nose and his mouth. He coughed so hard his ribs cramped. The last thing he remembered was white headlights, the sound of an impact, and one unfinished thought about a teapot he'd forgotten on the stove. Now he was breathing someone else's air, in a place that made no sense. He pushed himself up on his elbows and looked around. A cracked workbench, rusty pliers hanging on a nail, a barrel of murky water in the corner. Outside the window, the sunset was burning orange, and someone in the street was shouting that fish had gone up by the copper coins, and that it was a rip-off. Copper coins, and he understood every word. A foreign language, and somehow it was already his. He grabbed the workbench to keep from falling, and that's when it happened. Oak, 40 years old. The left side sagging to millimeters from damp. For fasteners, 2 of them loose. Load limit, no more than 80 kilograms. The information arrived all at once, like a file opening itself inside his skull. He yanked his hand back. Then, slowly, he touched the wood again. Same flash, same certainty. He could see straight through the workbench. Every fiber, every crack, every point about to fail. It was impossible, and it worked. He picked up a broken shard of a knife from the table. Steel, carbon content, 0.4%. Overheated during forging. A hairline crack at the tang. 12 strikes, and this blade would come apart in someone's hand. Who builds a knife this badly, he wondered. Then he found the vial. A glass vial on the floor. 7 ingredients, 4 of them useless. 15% of the strength it claimed to have. Back in his old life, a company would get fined for this. Sued into the ground. Daniel had been an engineer for 6 years, fighting companies that design washing machines to fail the day the warranty ran out. So people would have to buy another one. And here he was, in a world with lanterns instead of light bulbs and potions instead of medicine, staring at the exact same crime. He stepped outside to figure out where in the world, or out of it, he'd landed. Stone houses, tile roofs, lanterns on poles, and no electricity anywhere. Just a dim greenish stone glowing inside each one. He touched the base of a lantern and froze. Shoddy mounting, no insulation. 60% of the light's energy wasted, burned off as nothing. 3 weeks, and this lantern would be garbage. Then you'd buy a new one. 60% isn't bad luck. 60% is a decision someone made on purpose. Someone here had built an entire system on things breaking down fast. And Daniel knew that system by heart. He staggered back into the workshop and collapsed onto the floor, because there was nowhere else to lie down. He didn't know where he was. He didn't know how he'd gotten here. He didn't even know if he could get back. But he already knew one thing for certain. Everything in this world was built wrong, and that was going to drive him out of his mind. Morning came with hunger clawing at his stomach. He hadn't eaten in over a day. In the corner he found a sack of grain, crawling with bugs. He picked them out with his fingers and chewed the raw kernels until his teeth ached. He needed water, and needed fire, but the barrel in the corner was growing something he didn't want to name. So he went to the market. The city was called Kronheim, loud, and reeking of manure. Carts creaked past. Guards in dull chainmail stood at the crossroads, bored and half asleep. And every single object he passed screamed the same message at him. I was built badly. I was built to fail. I was built so you'd pay again. The smell of fresh bread hit him, and his stomach twisted into a knot. He had no money. Not one copper coin. Hungry, broke, and stranded in a foreign world. His only asset was the ability to see, with total clarity, exactly how badly everything here was made. And that's exactly where his story actually begins. Near the tavern, he spotted her. The same woman. Face flushed, hands dusted white with flour. She was shouting after a man in a blue cloak with a silver clasp. 6 silver coins for 1 vial of healing potion. She only had to. Her husband had fallen off a roof. His back was broken. Without that potion, he'd never walk again. The man in the blue cloak didn't even turn around. He adjusted his clasp and kept walking. The woman watched him go, then turned and disappeared inside. Daniel stood there thinking about the vial back at the workshop. 7 ingredients, 4 of them dead weight. If he stripped those out, boosted the one that mattered, found the right ratio, he could make the same cure. Cheaper, simpler, out of things growing in any backyard garden. He walked into the tavern. Cramped, stuffy, 5 tables, benches instead of chairs, the floor sticky underfoot. Behind the counter stood the same woman, rubbing her eyes with the back of her hand. 2 children beside her, a boy of 7 silently picking at porridge, a girl of 5 clinging to her skirt. Daniel asked for a bowl of soup on credit. She said she didn't do credit. Then she looked at his face again and said, "Fine, 1 bowl. Hot broth, a piece of bread. Best meal of his life, or his new one." He wasn't sure how to count it anymore. While he ate, he listened. The tavern was simply called the Hall. The woman's name was Maggie Hall. Her husband was a carpenter. 3 days ago he'd fallen off a roof he was repairing. Something wrong with his spine. He couldn't move. The guild's cure cost 6 silver coins. A guard's monthly wage was 2. Maggie made 3 in a good month, and she had to saved. She was 4 coins short of saving her own husband. Daniel finished the soup, then asked if she had dried herbs in the kitchen. She looked at him like he'd lost his mind, then said yes. In the pantry. He asked about plantain growing behind the tavern wall. She had it. River moss the kids collected last week, sitting in a bucket by the door. He asked to see her kitchen. She crossed her arms and said she didn't know him. Didn't know where he came from, and if he was some kind of sorcerer. He could get lost. He told her he wasn't a sorcerer. He just understood materials, and he wanted to try something, not for money, just for the bowl of soup. She stared at him for 10 long seconds. Then she turned and walked into the kitchen, and he followed. He touched each ingredient in turn. Old herbs, 70% strength left. Fresh plantain, needing a rinse. River moss, 90% active and cold from the water. He never brewed a potion in his entire life. But holding these ingredients, he could see their structure the way an engineer reads tolerances not by eye, but by data. He worked for 5 hours straight, rinsing plantain 3 times, grinding herbs into fine powder, soaking moss for exactly 20 minutes, not 19, not 21. He heated the mixture, cooled it, heated it again more gently, added more plantain, let it settle. By evening, a cloudy green liquid filled the pot. He poured it into a clean glass and studied it. 65% of the guild's healing power. Not perfect, but enough to start the recovery. Cost, 8 copper coins and herbs already drying out in her pantry. The guild charged 6 silver coins for the same job. He climbed the stairs. Maggie's husband lay in a small room under the sloping roof, ashen with pain. Unable to move, Daniel fed him the potion, spoon by spoon. The man grimaced at the bitter taste. Daniel said that meant it was working. He had no idea if that was even true. An hour later, the man said his back felt warmer. 3 hours later, he wiggled his toes. By morning, he was sitting up in bed. Maggie stood in the doorway looking from her husband to Daniel and back again. Then she brought him a full plate and said the soup debt was settled. That night, lying in a borrowed corner, Daniel did the math. 8 copper coins versus 6 silver. And if he refined the formula further, he could push it even higher. A week later, there was a line outside the tavern's back door. 10 people, then 15, then 20, a laundress with hands eaten raw by lie, an old man whose back wouldn't straighten, a mother with a child who'd been coughing for 3 weeks. Daniel treated each one differently. No single cure fits every wound. He adjusted every formula to the person standing in front of him. By the first week's end, he'd earned enough to pay off his debts, buy decent clothes, and rent a room in the attic. He lay on a narrow bed under the sloping roof, staring at the ceiling, and thought that even the spider spinning its web up there was an engineer. 2. In the 3rd week, he rented that same abandoned workshop where he'd first woken up. For 1 silver coin a month. The roof leaked into places. A wall was rotting with mold, but the stone was thick, and the drain in the floor meant real work had happened here once. He spent 3 days repairing it with his bare hands, patching, reinforcing, sealing the windows with oiled cloth in place of glass. And on that 3rd day, a woman named Emma Wright showed up at his door. Thin, dark hair pulled back, glasses with lenses ground unevenly by her own hand. Fingers stained yellow, brown, and green from chemicals. She'd heard he made potions that actually worked. For 8 copper coins where the guild charged 6 silver. She asked to watch him work. She told him she'd been thrown out of the alchemist guild for months ago for asking why an old recipe used an herb. That canceled out its own cure. The master told her the recipe was 300 years old and couldn't possibly be wrong. She said old doesn't mean right. She was expelled the next day. Daniel handed her a vial of his own potion and told her flatly, "You were right about that herb. It was never in the correct recipe." Her hands shook as she opened the stopper and smelled it. Then she looked up, eyes shining, and said she wanted to work for him. For food and a roof. Money later. Daniel said the money came first. 2 silver coins a month. She nodded so fast her glasses slid down her nose. With Emma beside him, everything changed. He could see through materials, but she knew every herb by name, every supplier, every season. Together, within a week, they built a line of 3 potions instead of 1. And Daniel didn't stop at potions. By the 4th week, he'd started making knives. Every day he watched people in Kronheim fighting their own tools. Blades that dulled in 10 strokes, blades built to fail so you'd buy another. He bought 3 broken blade fragments for almost nothing. Since no one repaired broken tools here, they simply threw them away. He built a crude furnace from brick and clay in half a day. Bellows from a bull's bladder and wooden slats. Not perfect, but enough heat to work steel. He spent 3 days on his first knife. Reforged the scrap. Straightened the blade. Built the tang long and thick so the handle held by structure, not glue. He tested it. 100 strikes against solid oak. Not a single failure. A guild blade would have snapped after 10. He made 4 knives in 2 weeks, each one shaped for a specific hand. A butcher's knife for Olaf. A light chopping knife for Maggie. Olaf tested his new blade on a piece of meat, chopped once, chopped again. Then asked the price. 1 silver coin, Daniel said. A guild knife cost 4, and doled in a week. Olaf placed the coin on the workbench without another word, and ordered 2 more. By the 5th week, Daniel had 3 potions and 4 knives moving out the door. And every evening he sat at his bench sketching the next idea. Lamps, he'd watch the street lanterns burn out every 3 weeks, forcing people to buy a whole new unit from the Enchanters Guild for 2 silver coins. His idea was simple, almost embarrassingly simple. Don't throw away the lamp. Just replace the crystal inside it, like swapping a bulb. He spent 3 days on the prototype, hand-cutting threads for a socket so the crystal could twist in and out with a quarter turn. He inserted the cheapest crystal he could find, gave it a turn, and the lamp flashed to life, warm and even. Nothing like the sickly green glow of the streetlights. He brought it to Maggie's tavern and set it on the counter. She looked at the lamp, then at him, and asked what the trick was. No trick, he said. When the crystal dies, you twist it out, put in a new one. 3 copper coins. Not to silver for an entire new lamp. Maggie called him crazy, then ordered 5 for the whole tavern. And by the next day, her neighbor wanted 1 too. Then the laundress. Then the butcher. Daniel could only build 2 lamps a day. Every socket hand-carved. Every body custom-fitted. He needed help. And not just anyone. Help arrived on its own defeat. In the form of a former lieutenant named Sarah Finch. Tall, dark-haired, straight-backed, her left arm ending just below the wrist. The stump wrapped in clean cloth. She brought a broken sword. One the blacksmith's guild wanted a silver and a half to fix. Money she didn't have on a guard's disability pension. Of 5 copper coins a month. Daniel fixed it for free in 10 minutes flat. Because 10 minutes work wasn't worth a silver and a half. Then Sarah looked at her missing hand and asked, almost against her will, if there was anything he could do about that too. He touched the stump. The bone had healed clean. The muscles were alive. It was workable. He said he'd try, and made no promises. For 2 weeks he worked on it in secret, alongside the lamps, sketching by candlelight until blood ran from his nose. From the strain of seeing too much, too long, he built a sleeve of leather and hinged steel, plates that shifted with her muscles, and 3 interchangeable hands, clicking on and often for seconds flat. 1 for daily tasks. 1 built to grip a sword in combat. 1 for delicate, precise work, holding a pen. When she clenched her new fist for the first time, the workshop went silent. Emma bit her lip in the corner. Maggie stood frozen in the doorway with her kids. Sarah picked up a quill with fingers that hadn't existed a month earlier, and drew 1 crooked, trembling line on a scrap of paper. She told him to shut up when he started listing maintenance instructions, then said flatly that she needed a job. He said he needed a security chief. Neither of them smiled, but she nodded, and stayed. The guild's first visit came the following week. A man named Arnold Federer, round, bald, dripping with silver trim, walking in like he owned the place. He announced that trading without a guild license violated the Kronheim craftsmanship code, and that a license cost 20 gold coins a year. Money Daniel didn't have and couldn't earn in years. Then came the real offer. 300 gold coins in exchange for every recipe, every blueprint, and a promise to stop working forever. Daniel read the contract carefully. Buried in it, a clause giving away every future invention. A clause silencing him from teaching anyone. A clause trapping him in the city for good. This wasn't a purchase of ideas. It was a purchase of him. He said no. Federer's smile turned cold, and he warned that the consequences would rest on Daniel's conscience alone, then walked out. Sarah closed the door behind him and told Daniel, flatly that he'd just declared war on people richer than the entire lower city combined. Daniel said he was aware. Then he sat back down at his workbench and kept working. 3 days later, inspectors showed up, ready to confiscate his goods on a complaint of illegal trade. Daniel had spent evenings at the city library, reading all 412 pages of the Kronheim Craft Code, and he'd found the cracks in it. His potions were pure herbal tinctures, technically outside the Alchemist Guild's jurisdiction. His knives weren't new goods, they were repairs of scrap, technically legal without a license. The official searched his papers for a violation, found none, and left with nothing but an excuse to write a report. One of the guards lingered by the door, staring at the warm glow of Daniel's lamp, and quietly asked how much it cost. It was a small win, but Daniel knew the guilds had only just begun testing him. In the 7th week, he caught a 12-year-old girl trying to steal a loaf of bread through his window. Skinny, filthy, feral, biting and scratching until she wore herself out. Her name was Lily. 3 years on the streets, parents dead in an epidemic, an orphanage that had kicked her out after 6 months. She knew the city like the back of her own hand. Which guard took bribes, which merchant cheated customers, every alley, every shortcut, every secret. Daniel fed her and started paying her for information. Not because he was spying, because he needed a map. And Lily was the best map the lower city had. A week later she brought to more street kids, and they became his couriers, running orders faster than anyone could follow. He wrote her name into his workshop's own ledger, apprentice, 10 copper coins a month, and handed her a paper sealed with a mark he'd carved himself, a circle around a hammer and a gear. She read it slowly, syllable by syllable, folded it, and tucked it against her chest. Later, her mother figure said she'd cried alone in a corner for 20 minutes. Lily denied it. By the 8th week, Daniel hung a plain sign over the door. Carter, we repair and make. The line outside stretched around the corner and never really stopped again. People brought him everything, broken locks, leaky pots, torn boots, and every time he explained exactly why the thing had failed and who had failed to make it right. They weren't angry at him. They were angry at everyone who'd sold them garbage for years and told them that's just how the world works. In the 10th week came his biggest breakthrough yet. The replaceable crystal still burned out every 3 weeks. Same as the guild's own lamps. He studied one for half an hour and understood. One narrow contact point meant 1 point of unbearable pressure, burning the crystal out from the inside. His fix was almost stupidly simple. For contact points instead of one, spreading the load evenly around the crystal's face. He tested it. 3 weeks passed, still glowing. A month, still glowing. 7 weeks total before it finally dimmed, more than double the guild's lifespan. 3 copper coins every 7 weeks, against a silver coins every 3. The lower city started talking about Carter's lamp like it was a small miracle. In the 11th week, 2 things happened at once. First, a sharp-eyed young woman named Hyam walked in, the daughter of a bankrupted merchant, carrying a leather notebook full of contacts across for provinces. Herb suppliers, crystal miners, river routes, none of them tied to the guilds. She offered her services as a buyer, a cut of every deal. And Daniel took the offer. Second, a man in a dark cloak arrived after sunset, introducing himself as Caspian Voigt, assistant to the crown's governor. The governor wanted leverage against the guild's tax privileges, and Daniel could become that leverage, protected unofficially in exchange for supplying the garrison. Daniel understood exactly what kind of trap this was, a useful club, only useful until it broke, or until the governor found a sharper one. But without the guild's shield, they'd crush him within a month. With it, he'd buy time to grow too big to crush it all. He shook the deputy's cold, dry hand. Sarah watched the man leave and said flatly that Daniel had just crawled into bed with a snake. He said he knew, but the floor, he added, was even colder. The 3rd month began with fire. Sarah's scream woke him before dawn. 1 word, we're on fire. Someone had thrown oil against the back wall and lit it. Emma was trapped inside, the door jammed shut by heat. Sarah's steel hand tore the frame apart, and Daniel pulled her out coughing, her glasses still clutched in her fist. Neighbors ran with buckets. An hour later the flames were out, but 1/3 of the workshop was gone, along with 3 weeks of Emma's stock. Sarah found a scrap of oil-soaked cloth on the ground, stamped with a tiny mark, the letter Z, the Enchanters Guild. Daniel looked at it, nodded once, and walked straight back to his workbench to start drawing the rebuild. He didn't just patch the wall. He divided the whole workshop into fire-resistant zones, separated by metal-lined doors. So, one fire could never take everything again. Maggie handed over her entire savings to fund it, calling it an investment. Not alone, because she believed in him, stubborn fool that he was. 12 days later, the rebuilt workshop stood bigger and stronger than before, with a night watch of hired guards standing sentry until sunrise. By the 4th month, he built an actual assembly line, breaking potion brewing into 6 separate stages, each worker mastering one simple step into days instead of 3 years. Output tripled, cost dropped to 5 copper coins a vial against the guild's 6 silver. A difference so absurd that customers assumed there had to be a catch. There wasn't one. He'd simply stripped out everything that didn't need to be there. In the 5th month, a woman named Celestina Davenport walked in wearing an expensive dress that looked completely out of place among the sawdust. The youngest daughter of a baron, 5 years spent polishing crystals for the Enchanters Guild, because they trusted a woman with nothing more complicated than that. She'd heard about the lamp with the replaceable crystal from an old woman at the market, who said for the first time in 10 years, she could see her granddaughter's face clearly. Celestina asked for a job. Daniel handed her one of his lamps and told her to take it apart, then put it back together, while he timed her. She stripped it to 8 pieces on the table, then reassembled it flawlessly, precisely, without a single wasted motion. The lamp lit up. He told her he'd eventually need someone for a watchmaking workshop, but for now she'd work the assembly line. She took off her lace gloves, hung them on a nail by the door, and stayed. 6 women now surrounded one engineer, running finance, alchemy, security, trade, intelligence, and assembly. And Daniel sometimes wondered if he'd landed in a fantasy world or just a very strange dream. In the guild's 6th month of pressure, they switched tactics entirely. Counterfeits, fake potions bearing his own mark appeared at the Southern Bazaar. 3 copper coins each, tinted water with 0 healing effect, wrecking his reputation with every angry customer who drank one. Daniel built a triple verification system, a hand-carved notch, a specific tint of green wax, a hidden letter carved inside the stopper. Lily and her boys taught every regular customer how to check it in today's flap, and Daniel set up a free public inspection table every single Wednesday. Counterfeits collapsed almost overnight, but Daniel understood it was only one round in a much longer fight. In the 8th month, an old man named Harold came to him, leaning on a crooked cane, his left leg ending below the knee in a raw, rag-wrapped stump. 30 years on a wooden peg leg. 30 years of pain with every single step. He asked if Master Carter could do anything for him. Daniel studied the stump for days before touching a single tool, asking about stairs, about weight, about the muddy fields Harold used to farm. He carved a curved dashwood foot that flexed like a leaf with every step, added a single hinge for the ankle, and built a leather sleeve from a mold of Harold's own stump. On the 4th day, Harold stood, swayed, and took his first step in decades without a jolt of pain traveling up his bone. He walked the length of the workshop, turned and walked back, while every single person in the room went completely silent. Then a tear ran down his weathered face, silent, unwiped. 30 years of pain, and for the first time, nothing. He said one word. Thank you. And Daniel realized that word was worth more than every gold coin the guild had ever offered him. Word spread through the city faster than any advertisement could. Not about potions, not about lamps, about a man who was finally walking again. In the 10th month, the guild struck at his supply chain instead, buying up every herb and crystal supplier within a 3-day radius, locking Daniel out entirely. 2 weeks of stock left before the entire workshop ground to a halt. Not from lack of customers, but from nothing left to build with. Daniel, Sarah, and Hyan took a 3-day trip into the mountains, straight past the guild's reach, to villages too small and too remote for anyone to have bothered controlling. They signed 3 fresh contracts directly with an old herbalist, a mining settlement selling crystal scraps the guild considered worthless trash, and a young farmer desperate for a fair price. None of it touched the guild's blockade. Every loophole exists exactly where the enemy assumes it isn't worth looking. In the 11th month, Celestina finally got her watchmaking workshop, and 3 days later, a crude but perfectly accurate clock was ticking upstairs, built entirely from scrap. Daniel began planning something bigger than a workshop, an actual manufactory with training halls, warehouses, and dozens of workers. He borrowed 28 gold coins from the crown governor himself, secured against 2 years of supplying potions and lamps to the garrison, a risky binding deal. Construction finished inside 2 weeks. For workrooms, a training hall, dormitories, a dining hall. 40 workers earning a real wage, with an actual day off every single week. Unheard of in this entire city. In the 13th month, Willie led him to a burned-out archive, and crawling through a filthy drain, Daniel found 3 surviving notebooks belonging to a man named Ulrich Van had come from another world 300 years earlier, with the exact same ability to see straight through materials. He tried to build the same thing Daniel was building, and his own students, the very people he taught, had murdered him and buried his knowledge to keep the power for themselves. His last written words, hurried and desperate, read simply, if you're reading this, don't repeat my mistake. Don't try to convince the masters. Teach the apprentices. Daniel sat in that filthy basement for a long moment, thinking of Emma, expelled for asking one honest question, and Lily, who'd once slept behind a trash can. He began teaching openly, every evening, in the manufactory's training hall, free to any worker, any apprentice, any street kid willing to sit and listen. 8 people came the first night. 40 were crammed onto the floor within a month. Some of them guild apprentices sneaking in underhoods, terrified of being recognized. He wasn't teaching a trade in secret. He was teaching people why things worked, and that turned out to be the most dangerous weapon he owned. Exactly 1 year after he'd first woken up in that sawdust, the guilds finally came for him with everything they had. They bought out every raw material supplier within 100 miles, all at once, burning down one man's drying shed the moment he refused to sell out. A rumor tore through the taverns, a poison called red rot, supposedly hidden inside Carter's potions. A lie that emptied his line of customers within a single day. And a formal charge of heresy against the craft landed on his desk, sealed by all 7 guilds, demanding his factory shut down and his property seized. 3 blows, all at once, time to break him before the trial even started. Daniel didn't argue in whispers. He set up a small table in the market square, 2 vials side by side, his own potion and the guild's own. He added a drop of silver solution to each. The guild's potion clouded gray, poisoned with hidden lead. His stayed perfectly clear. One by one, people who'd used his lamps, his knives, his cure stepped out of the crowd to stand beside him, 10, then 50, then 200 strong. The guild's own representatives stood on the city hall steps, looked at that crowd, and walked back inside without saying a single word. 2 days later, the trial began in a packed hall, guards lining the walls, the young governor watching from his seat, and Daniel sitting alone with no lawyer beside him. The guild's master spoke for 20 minutes about tradition, about responsibility, about the danger of untrained hands. Then Daniel stood up. He laid 30 vials on the table, 15 from each side, and proved point by point that the guild's own potions contained a legal lead, hidden inside a painkiller sold to children. He struck a guild knife against solid oak. It failed on the 12th blow. Then he struck his own knife the same way. It held past 100 strikes without a single flaw. The guild master finally admitted the quality was real, but argued that control mattered more than quality, that anyone learning a trade in today's instead of 3 years was reckless. Daniel answered that every single vial he sold carried his own name, his own record, and full accountability, because real quality control means responsibility, not secrecy. The young governor rose to his feet. He dropped every charge, confirmed Daniel's right to trade freely, and announced he'd personally petition the crown for a royal patent. The hall exploded into noise. The guild's master walked out through a side door without a word. 300 years of monopoly, broken by one engineer with a measuring spoon. 2 weeks later, a royal courier arrived carrying a scroll bearing the king's own seal, granting Daniel Carter permanent, crown-protected status as a master craftsman. No guild could touch his factory again without a direct order from the king himself. His name on parchment in a world that wasn't his, but had somehow become exactly his own. He sat alone on the factory steps at dawn, the scroll on his lap, and for the first time in a year, let himself think about the life he'd left behind. An apartment in Dayton, a cat named Wrench, probably with a neighbor by now, memos nobody read, about parts that should come apart with for screws. Lily found him there, barefoot, carrying hot tea with mint and honey, scolding him gently for skipping another meal. He drank it, and realized every ingredient in that single mug connected a mountain herbalist, a valley beekeeper, and a city potter, all tied together through him. One by one, the others arrived. Maggie hugged him so hard his ribs ached. Emma reported the newest potion's strength, already climbing higher. Sarah simply nodded, which from her meant everything. Hyan was already planning expansion routes. Celestina wanted to build a clock worthy of a royal master. Lily, who couldn't yet read the scroll herself, sat down beside him anyway. By afternoon, a royal order arrived for an entire new branch in a border town, potions, lamps, knives, and 20 prosthetic limbs for wounded veterans of the border guard. Daniel looked at that number, 20 people missing arms, legs, fingers, and said yes without a second of hesitation. That evening, alone in his study, he opened a fresh notebook and began writing down everything he knew, every recipe, every blueprint, every method, for whoever might need it after him. He wrote until midnight, his hands aching, a familiar quiet ringing behind his temples. The price his gift always demanded. Then he walked the silent workshop floor, past the lamps, the forge, the assembly line, past Celestina's unfinished chiming clock glinting in the lamplight. He stepped outside into the quiet street and counted. The windows glowing warm and steady across the lower city, 112 lamps, burning through the night. And somewhere deep inside him, he felt it. A thread back to his old world. Thinner now than it had been a week ago. Fainter than it had been a month ago. He could pull it right now and be gone. Back to Dayton. Back to a quiet, honest, lonely life fixing things that never really needed him. He thought of Maggie's basket of bread every single morning. Of Emma's potion climbing toward 100%. Of Sarah standing guard at his gate without ever once saying thank you out loud. Of Harold climbing 12 stairs without a cane. Of Lily learning her letters one slow syllable at a time. Of 200 people who'd stood beside him in that square. The thread rang one last time, quiet as a bell far past the horizon. He didn't pull it. He turned and walked back toward the light spilling out from his own front door. Lily was waiting on the step, wrapped in a stolen blanket, asking in a small voice if he was ever going to leave. He told her no, not ever. She studied his face for a long moment, then nodded, satisfied, and told him to come eat, because Anna's apple pie was getting cold. He ate that pie standing in the kitchen of a factory he'd built by accident, in a world that had needed him more than his old one ever had. Then he sat down at his desk, pulled out a blank sheet of paper, and began sketching a watermill for a village that was tired of grinding grain by hand. Because that was simply who Daniel Carter was. Whenever he heard that someone, anyone, was struggling, he sat down and he drew. Somewhere between the second slice of pie and the first line of that new drawing, the thread to his old world finally, quietly, without any drama at all, went completely silent. And Daniel Carter didn't even notice it happen, because he was already sketching the next gear. He'd spent an entire lifetime believing that maintainability mattered more than beauty, that a broken thing should never be thrown away, when it could simply be fixed. It turned out that belief was exactly what an entire strange, magical, unfair world had been waiting 300 years for. Not a hero with a sword, not a wizard with a spell, just an engineer with a measuring spoon, a steady hand, and the simple refusal to walk past anything built to fail. And that, in the end, was more than enough to change everything.